Welcome to Post-Doom, regenerative conversations exploring overshoot grief, grounding, and gratitude. I'm your host, Michael Dowd, and this episode is different from the others. This is not me in conversation with Catherine Ingram, but Catherine in conversation with her students on the topic of kindness in harsh times. While Catherine doesn't use the term post-doom, I find her to be a profound older sister and inspiration for this entire series. Her long-form essay, Facing Extinction, was one of the foundational, inspiring documents of this series. But also, back in 1990, she wrote In the Footsteps of Gandhi, Conversations with Spiritual Social Activists. So I consider her an older sister on this path, whether she uses the term post-doom or not. Enjoy.
Welcome to In the Deep. I'm your host, Catherine Ingram. The following is excerpted from a session of Dharma Dialogues held in Lennox Head, Australia in June of 2019. It's called Kindness in Harsh Times. I was just reflecting on kindness. Kindness. Lovely fragrance, just saying the word. And I was thinking about how sometimes I am challenged to be kind in certain circumstances because the kindness impulse is going up against the discerning or judging impulse, and how sometimes people can be very challenging and it doesn't engender feelings of kindness toward them, even though they may be most in need of it. And I think in the last, I don't know how long it's been, it seems a long time, that it's been this sort of meme in the culture that you don't enable people and you don't coddle because it reinforces certain types of habits and things like that. And I think it's probably good to err on the side of being overly generous in this regard. That sometimes people are just at their edge. They're beaten down. And the difference between them snapping and not snapping, or falling into some horrible depression, or acting out, or having an accident, or whatever, might simply be just a kind word or a kind offering to them. My brother, the one who died, he was often in some sort of crisis, not harmful to others really, but to himself, and not kind of taking care of himself, and consequently, he was often very, very distressed. He had a hard life. And I would mostly be the one that would be hearing about all the terrible things of his day, and being with him while he's crying, and so on. And I would be accused of coddling him and enabling him and that kind of thing by my family. They didn't have as much tolerance for it. And I must say that now, in this great hindsight, it's been quite a lot of years since his death, all I can think is I wish I had been more kind. I wish I had been more there for him. I wish I had, like that scene in Schindler's List where he's holding up a ring that he had, and he's saying, why didn't I sell this I could have saved, 5 more people with this ring, like that. It's like, so this is yet another thing I think we have to challenge in the culture, because things are getting harsher. And I would, and I do challenge it in my own case with situations where I'm called upon to kind of find some deeper understanding, some deeper well of kindness even in the face of someone acting out, or it might appear that this person is making a mess and being unkind themselves. In my hometown where I grew up, yesterday, there was a mass shooting. 12 people were shot and killed. The shooter was also shot and killed. He's number 13, and now there's also people who are in critical condition. And it all happened quite near where my family is and where they would go, at the courthouse, where it's the civil building. None of my family are involved in it, except to the degree that it increases anxiety in their thoughts and in their lives. And no doubt they're one degree of separation from someone who did die. And I was looking at the picture of the shooter, whose face looked very nice, but who obviously had been pressed to his limit, right? He'd been a city employee, an engineer for many years. Even that day, he walked in and said hello to somebody, but he snapped, obviously. And we are now living in a time where the pressures are mounting. There's more and more anxiety. There's a lot of stress. And it's going to really, I think we're going to be called upon to offer a lot of understanding going forward into our next phase as these pressures mount, right? And it will challenge each of us, because it will seem at times that you just feel like, no, that person should be, beaten down. Good that they're beaten down, But that's obviously not going to help. And the thing about kindness is that it is also kind to yourself to feel. So, of course, when I heard about this thing yesterday, in my thoughts, I'm saying I'm going to look up, I want to see the face of this monster. Instead, I see this nice-looking person who has a very sweet, open face, right? And in my mind, in this instant, I said to myself, some pressures mounted, and he snapped, right? Maybe he was the recipient of a lot of unkindness or a lot of feeling as a failure. That's often what the motivation is in these mass shootings. For many, many years, my New Year's resolution, we're going back to like the 80s. Every single year I had the same one, be more kind. So it's something I'm still working on.
I guess it just makes me wonder why. Why is everything accelerating and becoming so much more anxious? I see it even in my own children, and they have a very relaxed upbringing compared to most. They don't have a lot of stress, and yet somehow they're anxious. It's almost like the anxiety of the world is sort of projected.
Yes.
Even onto people who actually have a very
comparatively easy life.
And I just wonder why. Why is it happening?
Why? Well, it's getting really crowded. Frankly, there's too many humans, for one thing. We're at 7.7 billion, and everything I read in the science says that this planet can support sustainably at this level about 1 billion. So we're way overshot in terms of use of resources, and that comes with a lot of stress and pressure, naturally. We're subject to hearing the news, like your children, even though they are living an easier life than many others, most others, no doubt, but they're privy to the information, right? Because they're all linked up. So they're hearing about, they're seeing on Facebook or whatever social media they're on. They're seeing on the various programs, no doubt, that they're watching. So there's an intensification of the information. At the same time, there's a lot of, violence and darkness rolling through the world. Of course, we're all experiencing the change of our climate, of our very ecosystem that we have put so far out of balance. The kids are onto that, right? And that's becoming, especially among the youth, that's becoming very much their primary issue. So their future, there's a line in a song that I love, an old song, predates your life, by Quicksilver, in which there's a line he says, "And I feel the future trembling," right? They feel the future trembling. I feel the future trembling. We can have some kind of discussion if we want about how we don't really see the future, etc. But we're sensitive creatures. We're picking up the vibes. There's static on the line of what we're picking up. So, yes, I think that this is the time to, in addition to kindness, for each of us to find very profound ways to stay calm ourselves. I think that's going to be really needed. And for your children, for everyone you're engaged with, for everyone you meet, for your family, just to kind of be an island of calm in the midst of it. Just as many people in history have had to be that in very dire circumstances, I think there's going to be a lot of that happening now. It is happening. It's happening in lots of the world. We're still living in these bubbles in which we have these conversations as though it's all theoretical. There are millions and millions of people who are not so privileged. Just this past week, the human rights organizations have made a joint statement that there is a huge humanitarian crisis in Syria because of so much violence. There's millions of people at risk of death by violence in Syria right now. And this is going on in South America, all over Africa. I mean, just in pockets all over the world, and barrios and slums and everywhere, And so it's a tough time, No wonder your kids are feeling anxious. One of my girlfriends was telling me the other day that she had just watched this Scorsese film about George Harrison. And she was saying, you should watch it. And I realized I had this tiny resistance when she said that. And I thought, why? And I realized sometimes when I see those reminders of that era, it makes me sad. Because I remember how it felt when I'm looking at those images and hearing the music. I have an entrainment to that time, and I feel we are so far from that time. That was an incredible time, and we took it for granted naturally, as one does. But somehow it's the same reason I don't look at the photographs of my brother that are sitting in a box and have not been opened since his death. It's all too poignant, and it's a different time now. Now, that doesn't mean there's less possibility for love. Maybe we've got to find a deeper, much deeper well a love to sit in, a love that has to accept the really unacceptable, you know. Because back in those days, that era I'm speaking about, even though there were difficult things happening, we had hope. We had massive amounts of hope. We thought we were going to change the world, rearrange the world, you know? And
it kind of makes it difficult to know how to talk to your children about this now because, there's always been this mantra of positivity and you have to be positive and everything's going to be fine. But actually, you can't really say that to your children. You can't say that everything's going to be fine. So it's quite hard to know how to talk to them about the future without it becoming really gloomy and even increasing their anxiety.
right.
So
Yeah.
it's quite difficult, I think, as a
I
parent.
so hear you, and I really feel for the parents of young children. I feel for them very deeply, and I know that they're all... I have a number of friends who are looking at these issues and who have children. Some of them have teenage children, and those teenage children are becoming very woke, as they say, in terms of what's going on, and are looking at the possibility that they are not going to have, they can't expect to have, these are young people thinking, I don't expect to have a long life. And this is a conversation, when can we remember in our time that parents would be having these kinds of conversations with their own children, even though many times in history that was the case, plagues came along or Vikings landed or whatever, there were horrible things that happened and changed life as they knew it. But this is we have crossed a Rubicon into a new territory that I don't think humans have yet faced. And it's really hard. But again, I think you have to come to a place of, first of all, your own deep quiet in this. And that's not to be expected to be a consistent quiet, because it sometimes really isn't. And sometimes the sorrow of the whole thing overwhelms. But to come to a recognition for your children, for what you can offer, which is a sweet and loving home and a good life for as long as they can have it. That's all that anybody is going to be able to offer now. I'm taking this liberty to say this to you, and unfortunately it's going to be going out to a lot of other people who aren't ready, but you are a scientist, and I know that these are not surprising facts for you. So I have taken a little bit of liberty here, but for you as a mother, it's a very different conversation, and I have been surprised by the descriptions of my friends who have teenagers who are looking at this, how strong they are. I've been really impressed. Now, I've been asking myself, and I've been asking my friends, do you think it's because their brains aren't very fully developed and they don't understand fully? I have a feeling about teenagers that they feel invincible and immortal, so maybe it's just some idea to them or whatever, but my friends assure me that, no, they're getting it. So then it throws you into the question of, do you want to be prepared yourself? And might there be some benefit in them being a little prepared? Or maybe not. Maybe you'll think only you as a mother will know your children. Maybe it makes sense to just be agnostic on the conversation with them, which is also a fair enough position. You can easily say, who knows how it's going to play out. You could not have to paint a picture of gloom and doom, at the same time not to paint necessarily a rosy picture that says it's going to work out, but let them come to their own decisions or conclusions about things as we go.
Do you think there is a role to play for hope? That one can always hope that there might be a slim chance, but there's still some hope that maybe we can turn things around if we really try. And I know certainly a lot of the scientists I speak to, they haven't lost hope yet. I mean, I know that quite a lot of them are close to it, depending on what field they're working in.
Yes. And some have actually, maybe they wouldn't say I've lost hope exactly in those words, but they don't see a pathway. But okay, let's just say, who knows? Maybe there's a chance. I mean, I heard David Suzuki say he thinks maybe there's a 5% chance. So, I think what we can say is that life as we have known it, in the kind of abundance that we have enjoyed, is very likely going to change very drastically. Whether we make it through in terms of survival is another question. One can be much more agnostic about that, but I think there's not much of a chance that we're going to be maintaining this set of living arrangements as we have been for much longer. So that has to be addressed and processed. And there's a lot of, I've been talking a lot recently about using the phrase deep acceptance, there's certain words that I find helpful, acceptance, kindness, go to quiet. And part of it also is releasing certain pictures one has about the future. Like, part of what's painful is you have a picture about the future that starts to fade. It starts to tremble, right? So to release the pictures and then really stay with this very experience of the now, right? I mean, it's kind of weirdly what we've been talking about in Dharma circles forever. This has been the point. We've been on a lot. And also with knowing that there's no guarantee about life, there's no guarantee of longevity for anybody. All those people who went to work yesterday in my hometown, right? And so it's not that far a stretch. It's not a completely out of the blue stretch to think that we don't know how this is going to play out. But it's dicey. And I also think that it's helpful. I mean, it's been my experience with working with a lot of people in this conversation over some years now, that it's helpful to start metabolizing this information more. That a lot of freedom comes with that, a lot of clarification about priorities, a lot of love, a lot of tenderness, a lot of letting go about a lot of goals and even goals for your children, right? One of my friends, the other night I was talking to him, his son was in the other room. His son is a junior in high school. He was in the other room writing a paper he was going to present to his teacher, explaining why he's not going to go to his senior year. He's basically saying, I don't see the point. I don't think we have much time. That's what he's saying in his paper. And I'm sure his father is telling me the story, and it's going to be a surprise to the teacher. She doesn't see the world that way, but he does. We're just in new territory.
The difficult thing too is that there's a lot of young people who really are wanting to act. They're marching for climate, and there's so many things going on, and it's very hard to say to them, don't bother, because I think they feel like they need to be doing something and having their voice heard.
And see, the thing is, one can take a position, which I personally think is beautiful, that says you act because it's the moral thing to do, right? You act and you offer what you can because it's just right. It's right to do that. And in a way, it's even more noble to act from that position than to act from a position of hope. It's a more noble stance. It's a higher ground in my way of seeing, that you keep, you keep, I like to sometimes say you vote with your life for the goodness, even if it's not going to prevail, whether or not it does. And I think that is what is going on for a lot of the activists. Now, I think some activists have taken the position of there's nothing much to do. Maybe not so many of the young ones, but, some of the young ones, in fact, but a lot of the longtime eco-warriors that I either know or know of have just decided to go off into quieter places and live out their days with their families. I think all of these responses are fair, and it just depends on what your own constitution demands.
I think it raises a question, and this question comes up in me when I think about things like Extinction Rebellion, and the school strikes, and all of those things. There's some part of me, which I think is also what you were saying, that is inspired by these movements. I can't help but feel inspired.
Yeah.
I love the action, and I love the vision, and I love the commitment, and people getting arrested and being willing to go to jail, gluing their breasts to buses. And do you know what I mean? And like I think about, the things I'm doing, and I'm inspired.
Yeah.
And yet I also share the same perspective here that you do. And the question is, there's one, it's almost like the difference between giving up and surrender. And it's a very fine line somehow. Like surrender offers me something, and giving up seems to just take me down. And I don't even know what the difference is there.
So you're using surrender as a more in the terms of acceptance, and giving up more like a sad resignation.
Yes, but there's only a wafer.
A difference. Well,
and
that's
I
okay.
slide either side of the wafer.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, understandably. Right? Yeah.
Because I think too, the other thing that comes up always in this conversation is when I go there, which we do, but when I go there, it does leave me feeling depressed. I can't help it. I feel sad for the world. I have everything I see. I feel sad for that, and I feel sad for that, and I feel sad for this. And, it does leave a pall over things.
Yeah.
And yet I guess the old vision, when you were talking about the Beatles, sorry, I don't even know if I'm getting to a question here, just blabbering away. But when I think about, the time of the Beatles and that whole revolution, which I was, it happened later in Australia. So it was early 70s in Australia, and I was just, pre-teen. So I grabbed a little bit of it. Do you know what I mean? So I was very, impressionable by it. But the vision of that time was where everyone was freer and there was more love, and people were dropping out and, living on the land and, self-sufficient and happy, creative.
Yeah.
So there was that vision, and so that's quite deep in me of what it would mean to have a good life.
Yeah.
But that good life doesn't really feel like it's on offer now. So there has to be some other version that gets created.
In my essay, I have a line quoting Jonathan Franzen, who's an American author who's won the National Book Award, but many awards. And I love this line: even in a world of dying, there are new loves being born, right? And so to really just keep allowing yourself each day to find the new loves, right? To find ways that something sparkles your heart, or just they can be really tiny, and maybe they need to be very tiny, and it can't be this overall shared shiny vision that was so fun in that time. Maybe that was just a very unusual bloom that happened, and seems to be an unusual bloom. Many other times of history have been hard. That one happened to be a really lovely one. But maybe our time now is having to include sadness, and is having to include the pain of intense empathy, and is having to include finding the new loves despite all of this. And maybe we don't have the luxury of that feeling of a shiny future, which after all did turn out to be short-lived. But maybe we have some other ways that we have to find to be human and to be our best version of a human. Just as many people have through time. Many, many, many people. Many times were really hard. Oh my gosh. And many lives were hard the world over, and today, even now, as we are talking, this conversation, that is the case, Yeah. So we can't, just as I was saying, you can't be tormented by your future pictures. We also can't be tormented by what went before, right? And we're thrown into, we have to be grateful. If we want to get through a day without going crazy, we have to be really grateful for this very day and for what is here now. We're going to have to get it right down to a tiny focus in a way,
Which is, that is the essence of, that's always been the essence of us, in inverted commas, the spiritual practice, hasn't it?
Yes.
Just right, pushing it right in the face.
Yes, it's how sweet the strawberry tasted, right? With the tigers above and the tigers below. And that is the teaching over and over again. And we get lured, we get entranced into, kind of these dreamlike states in our kind of dreamlike paradises that we move around in. So I think sadness is part of it. I do.
Sadly.
Yes, sadly, it's part of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I got a bit excited. I mean, I don't hold on to hope about we're going to find some solution and continue on.
Yeah.
I hold on to this kind of strange hope that we're going to come together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that where we're facing this common issue and it's going to bring to a head all these issues about connection and, you know, and between, you know. So it was really, you know, before the election, The Guardian was really gunning for their climate issue and it's a climate election. I just sort of had this little idea that Australians might wake up and, you know, and then when it didn't happen, I think it really depressed me because I thought even in the face of this, we're still going to be separate.
Well,
You know?
okay, I hear you, and that's a fair point if you think about the whole country. But we do live here in this region, and I think that what may start to happen, there are signs and projections about this, is that it may be that a lot more local resilience starts to be where people turn, and there might be many different local resilient communities all over the world that start to operate outside of the federal governments.
Which would be, you know, wonderful. It'd be a great structure for Australia to do that, to have communities and just enable.
Yeah.
And then it's so
and
nice.
then each community has their own specific needs, you know, that it might be the needs for one community. I mean, it's the case for localization in any case, right? That the needs of one community might be quite different than
They are in Australia. We're so diverse.
Such
you know,
diverse
the whole-
land. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But I guess it makes me realise just how many people in Australia, there's a majority that don't give a shit and hold certain values that I just don't hold. Like, you know, and then I kind of, you know, get this sort of jealousy of New Zealand and Jacinda Ardern and like the wellness thing. And it's like, and that's what I was hoping for, this sort of sense of like, the system isn't working. Yippee. We've been saying that for ages. It's an opportunity to try a different life, to be different, for our governments to be different. And I just felt really bogged down by being in Australia and Australian politics. And obviously there's a big subset of the Australian population that really have very different ideas about the environment, about refugees, about, you know, all sorts of
But
issues.
time will give the lessons. And, you know, it's going back to what I said at the beginning about sometimes our ability to feel kindness toward some people, some groups of people or specific people is hindered by our judgment, by our feelings that they don't deserve our kindness. They're, you know, they're asleep or they're ignorant or whatever. But the thing about ignorance is that it's just someone who hasn't noticed something, you know. It's like forgive them for they don't know what they do. People don't realize that.
I think it's just when you feel that the impact of their ignorance is having on things, you know, like it makes me feel angry.
It's not just them.
But what do you think about anger in that face? Because it's hard to be kind when you feel angry, you know. And I used to look at America with Trump and be like, oh my God. And now I really, I've felt this about Australia for a long time anyway, but it's now just feels again, you know, that the ignorance is harmful, you know.
But ignorance always was. And how far back do we go to start laying the blame? How far back? The first people who got into agriculture, because agriculture allowed a lot of population growth. Or maybe go back further, you know, discovering fire or crawling out of the ocean. I mean, how far back should we lay the blame, right? Where did ignorance start? And so, you know, and I know in my own case, in my own life, I've been ignorant about many, many, many things that I look back on those positions now and think, I just didn't know. I didn't have enough life experience yet. So to really just reframe it in your heart, and this is for you, right? For you, like the kindness is to yourself, to say, okay, well, time is going to be giving the lessons. I don't need to, right? Time is going to be delivering the syllabus. And a lot of people have moved a great distance. You know, we don't learn fast as a species, and probably we don't learn fast enough at this point. But
Do you think there's any role for anger, however?
In very, very conscribed situations, like a righteous anger can be a kind of lighting the fuse of energy, right? But the problem with it is that it's impossible to be sustained. It will drain you. It will make you sick.
But it naturally can arise. So I can be quite spiritual. I just suppress my anger. But the reality is that is an experience.
Of course it's going to arise. And I don't suggest suppression. I suggest understanding. Let it arise and then go to the understanding. Just as it did for me this morning, looking at the picture of the person who just shot up my town. You know, I had anger. And I said to myself, I want to see the face of this monster, right? And then I see this nice looking face, like really open face, like somebody you'd be happy to talk to on the bus, you know? You know, to really just, and people are afraid. And they're afraid for their jobs, and and a lot of people their days are just this rollout of like drone work, like just getting through, right? Kind of 10 steps behind themselves. And they don't have the luxury to think more deeply. In a way, deep consideration has been another privilege we've had. Deep consideration, you know. I said recently on that interview with Nick that, you know, I flew into Bangkok on the way to Italy last year. I had to lay over one night in Bangkok. And flying in at about 1,000 feet up, I could see out of both sides of the plane, out of all sides, actually, really, because we kept flying, so I keep looking around. I could not see a horizon that wasn't lights in every direction. The sprawl was, I hadn't been there since the early 80s, or maybe 84 or something like that. Right? There are a lot of these mega cities now where everyone on the ground is just bustling around, hustling. Their day is hustling. And there's probably not a lot of ecological reflection in these places. Another friend told me, from South Korea, and he said that now in South Korea, so much pollution is blowing into South Korea from China, which has also started to implement CFCs again, which have been banned. But that's not the air pollution that's now going into South Korea. But it's so bad that anyone who can afford has to have a house filter for their air, to breathe their air in South Korea because of the China pollution that's coming into their homes, you know. So where do we start to lay the blame? These are people who want to have an economic life like we've enjoyed all these years, right? It just goes on and on like this. So yes, I know the impulse. I know it well in my own case. And I know how impossible it is to maintain. And also, once I see through it, I also see what a folly it is to bother to try to maintain it, because it's like if you look deeply at anybody's circumstance, usually your heart just breaks for them, you know. They're afraid. A lot of people are afraid. And they're holding on for dear life to what little thing they've cobbled together, right?
Yeah, I just feel for that whatever time is left, that the opportunity that presents to be different and to interact different gets eclipsed by this continuing in a really dead, destructive system. You know,
But
till
that
the end,
very thing that you're seeing
yeah.
is the transformation for you. That is going to that will put you in the position of being on the cross, saying, forgive them, right? That's the transformation that I'm speaking about today. At the beginning, I said sometimes kindness is hard to come by because your discernment and your judgment are making it impossible because you think these people actually deserve your condemnation.
Yeah, and even if it's not condemnation, sometimes it's just wanting to say something when you know it's pointless. You know, I had this experience last night, and I was talking to my nephew, and then he said, "I don't tell the other nephew. He'll get upset." And of course, I just went in and told him, you should do, blah blah blah. And he got upset and left the room. And I was like, and what I wasn't being nasty, I was just, helping him.
Yes.
So sometimes I sort of feel really frustrated with this sense of you just got to shut up all the time, and then what do you do with that frustration and anger? By seeing things, not being able to say anything, having to pretend, and that's not real kindness. And pointing things out when it's not going to help people isn't kindness either. So when you're living in that way where people are blind and it hurts them to become unblind, you've got to also be blind, or you've got to be gagged or something. There just isn't a lot of freedom in that, I find it frustrating.
Yeah, no, I know, of course. But I mean, I'll quote the Buddha. He said, always speak the truth, but only the truth that's skillful. And there are times when the skillful thing is to not speak. And it's not a lie. It's in service to the greater good. It's in service to the higher good. That we don't always have to speak everything that we passionately feel. And no, we're in new ground now, right? And it's going to cause a lot of very painful transformation in each of us, right? But the other side of that can be some kind of freedom, where you start living like I was thinking about this recently, and I spoke about it a few weeks ago, how your own self-referencing just becomes irrelevant, right? It just becomes, you're just so uninterested in it. There's such a bigger show, right? And your whole system starts to move much more in thoughts that are we thoughts, right? And that also include, the people who are not exactly on our wavelength, right? We inevitably think about them too. But I'm going to come right back to your point about, to emphasize this understanding of having a local life here and having local resilience here, which will include Dharma resilience and a lot of sharing that we're going to be needing to do in all ways, right? So let's take heart in these ways that we can and not worry about the massive ignorance out there. It's huge. It's massive. It always was, but now there just way more people, and they're in a lot more stress than they used to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is all predicted. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto early on, predicting the outcome of capitalism, you know?
Yes.
But here it is. It's like in our faces. So I
It's in our
suppose I
faces.
just thought, now no one can deny that it's not working, but apparently you can keep denying.
Yes, denial is,
Forevermore.
yeah, definitely. Yes, people deny their own death on the day they're dying. Right?
Somehow this is helpful with my anger, and I sort of feel like there is fear underneath the anger. It's like a sense of desperate waking up.
Well, and it was also a little connected to hope, wasn't it? That you had a hope.
Yeah.
That, okay, finally, when it's
like
the
when there's
house is on fire.
There's a crisis, like the floods in Brisbane and everyone
Yeah.
just stopped work and got together, and it was all really nice, and I'm waiting for that. But it's, maybe that will happen, maybe it won't.
Yeah, or some versions of it may happen, or other kinds of things that one had maybe hoped don't happen. And so you start to have a much lighter relationship with all of this, and think you can't really predict how it's going to go, in how it plays out. But I would say to keep it simple and realize that you're having your own Dharma resilience is the only thing you need to be worried about, right? That will see you through. That'll help everybody around you.
Can you just define Dharma resilience?
It's really what we're talking about here, that you keep doubling down on kindness, on acceptance, on openness, on seeing out there not enemies, but just people who don't yet know, and willingness to be used however you're needed, without a big story about how that should be or shouldn't be. Dharma resilience, right? Going to quiet, like having a deep, profound relationship with your own quiet that says, okay, come what may. And that's going to be, I would say, a mantra that we need, just, right, to just keep. So for me, back in all these years of the climate immersion, every new piece of information I would get, and I was studying it every day, it was coming in like new stabs, like it was the death of 1,000 cuts, right? And now the information is rolling in more than ever, but it's like, it's not coming in as stabbings any longer. It's coming in as, it's coming into a quiet ground.
I guess I came to just be a part of the conversation, and this has been a deep consideration for a long time. And I don't know if you know of a teacher called Stephen Jenkinson in Canada.
I do, yes. I don't know him personally, but yes.
Yeah, I've been studying with him the last years, and
and he was just here.
he was.
Yeah.
And I had some very privileged, close time, and this has been the consideration in his efforts and his
work.
It's there's a capacity for engaging in this that he calls a skill in brokenheartedness.
Mm-hmm.
That in different language, Dharma resilience, I'm transposing, and I think for me it's been it's a practice of just non-aversion, not turning away from the brokenheartedness without collapsing into it. And he talks about rather being not attaching to hope, but not collapsing into hopelessness, and it's a state of being hope-free.
Yes.
And it's all the same practice and skill and wisdom that we've been given from 1,000
Yes.
different lineages. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to, be in the conversation, be a part of, I guess for me, the consideration of, what matters, where do I matter, where does my voice or my action have consequence or serve, whether it's to shut up or to apply the skillful means of, I don't know, just aching with, or or maybe it's planting fruit trees and the dilemma in my own world. And it's just like I've been a part of a few very aspirational and wonderful experiments in communal living from those days where George Harrison was our soundtrack.
Yes,
And
yes.
the beauty of that, and the place to hold that still as a resource.
Yes.
And not let it all become like ash in my fingers and the gone.
It's beautiful. Mm-hmm.
So it's a kind of paradoxical place that I'm in, where I had I see now in a way the blessing of having my whole structure torn away and deaths and endings and all the human stuff, and still here I am living in the north coast of Shire. It's pretty lucky,
Very lucky.
It's extraordinarily lucky. And I had the means to go. I've been going to Canada a lot, and, those really worthy efforts of those of us that have the means and the good karma or something to be having space to consider these things. And so I don't know, there's some kind of marriage around now. Okay, where it's like look to your water, look to your food, and look to the, Stephen uses the term village, village mindedness. Yes. And I've been using these it's like the work that I'm doing or cultivating more of is basically in ways we can create skillful, resilience in so many ways. Because, the invitation to despair and to paralysis, freeze, inaction is just everywhere. Or it's fury and anger, and it's,
So it's kind of denial. Or sometimes, one of my friends wrote a paper which is fantastic, and it has to do with it's like the trauma of ecological awareness, right? And the psychology of it, and that his position is, and he links it to a lot of the addiction, that because we're living so far from our base of life, right? And because we're living so far and disconnected from nature, that it's actually causing psychopathy in a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And
I do a lot of reading too. That
goes along
I have to be careful not to re-traumatize myself. There's a lot of
that. Yeah.
The science of it and the wisdom of it, and and it's to be aware. Just the opportunity to remember the silence has been really helpful.
Yes, and more so. We just did this retreat in New Zealand, and this awareness is never very far from my consciousness. But I've noticed I've been through quite a few silent retreats since I've been on this subject in this way. And I notice every time I'm in a silent retreat, even though the same kind of material is rolling through, it's so calm, it's so quiet. It's like there's this profound acceptance, and I get back into my workaday world and busyness, right? And then an onslaught of information coming in of all sorts, not just climate stuff, but all kinds of things. And, and I can feel that it changes its power in terms of the quiet that's looking through which I'm looking at it. But one of the things I'm recommending to myself and to everyone is to start having a lot more of that quiet time, a lot more of that quiet, you know? And that all these little bits of information we're juggling that are pointless, really, we could probably dump half of them or more. And to really start to know that that's also going to be part of this, is that, you know, for those of us who start developing this very strong habit, it just makes you all the stronger.
Yes, down into the roots of it. So, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
For more information about this project, go to postdoom.com.